Welcome. Are you thinking about traveling to Vancouver Island? Here's a little video done last end of winter, beginning of spring, of a weekend trip to the Cowichan Valley. Not as well known as Victoria or Long Beach. Very, very beautiful. I hope you enjoy. On to the ferry we go. So here we are on the coastal renaissance, heading over to Vancouver Island. BC Ferries is a fairly large fleet. It has 35 ships that sail on 25 different routes on the west coast of British Columbia. With service to and from Metro Vancouver to Vancouver Island, the Sunshine Coast, the Central Coast, Bella Coola, the Gulf Islands, and the Queen Charlotte Islands, also called Getaway. The BC coast has over 40,000 islands. Man, I have lived here my entire life, and that number is really surprising to me. Here we are, we're looking over at Vancouver. That darker little bit along the water is UBC, the University of British Columbia, and behind it are the coastal mountains. The largest island is Vancouver Island, and that's the largest island on the west coast of North America. It's over 32,000 square kilometers. The next largest islands are part of Getaway, Graham Island and Moresby Island. Graham's a little bit over 6,000 square kilometers, and Moresby is a little over 3,000 square kilometers. Getaway is an archipelago which is comprised of hundreds of islands, a little bit farther north than Vancouver Island. Here we're looking at the Sunshine Coast and North Vancouver. The Sunshine Coast is part of the mainland, but is only accessible via BC ferries or boat. Here we're looking at Gabriola Island, one of the Gulf Islands, and behind it, those mountains are part of Vancouver Island. Here's a map of Vancouver Island and the coast, the mainland. This line here is the boundary between United States to the south and Canada to the north and west. This little tiny point here is part of the United States, but it's attached to Tsawwassen, which is part of Delta in Vancouver, kind of one of those anomalies. And today we're heading over to Vancouver Island. Starting here in Ladner, there are two ferry routes to Vancouver Island. We're going to go over here, which is the Cowichan Valley. One choice is to go through the Gulf Islands to Swartz Bay, which is just north of Victoria, and then drive through Victoria up island over the Malahat Mountain and into Duncan and the Cowichan Valley. If you've never been to British Columbia and are planning to travel to Vancouver Island, this is a really pretty route through the islands, and Victoria is very pretty. As a resident, I chose to go up and through Nanaimo because the traffic is way less, because we end up docking at Duke Point, which is just south of Nanaimo. And the view is still pretty. You get to see the big expanse of the Strait of Georgia and Vancouver and the North Shore Mountains And here is the Sunshine Coast. And some of the Gulf Islands here, Galliano, and here's Gabriola. And right this little dot is Entrance Island that you'll see at the end of the video. Going to Duke Point takes 2 hours by ferry, and going to Swartz Bay takes a little over an hour and a half, but then you got to travel through Victoria and all the traffic. So we decided to go to Duke Point, which is south of Nanaimo, and Nanaimo is the home of the Nanaimo Bar. I was born and raised in Nanaimo, and I'm going to try to get my mother's Nanaimo Bar recipe to put in the notes for you. Once you get to Nanaimo, you drive down Highway 1 through a bunch of different pretty little towns and down to Duncan and the Cowichan Valley. Duncan is a really cool little town. The downtown is very picturesque. It was built in the 50s and 60s and never really touched, so it looks like a really cool older town. We're also going to go to Coxella, which is where the Kinsol Trestle is. But first, here we are driving down Coxella Road. It's just so beautiful. All these lovely rolling hills. We're driving to our Airbnb, going the back way. Just so pretty. This is February 28th, 2025 when I filmed this. So the grass is very, very green. Mountains in the background. And here we're going to go over the Coxella River. This is a one-way bridge. That's an old church. I think somebody lives in that now. And we're going to go under the now defunct CNN Railroad. We get the right of way, so we're going to zip on through. Our first stop is refueling at Drumroaster Coffee, where they have awesome coffee. And the best Funky Monkey muffins. For dinner, we stopped at the Crowing Gate pub with my brother and his wife. It's an awesome little Old English style pub in the middle of the farmlands just south of Nanaimo. It was built in 1972. You got to go there. The next day we walked the Kinsol Trestle. If you get a chance, I highly recommend this walk. It's built along the old CNN Railroad, so there's not a lot of elevation up and down. Up and downing? It's about 3 kilometers there and back from the parking lot, which is just west of Shawnigan Lake. Here you'll see the old timbers from the railroad stacked along the trail. It's kind of cool. Lots of picnic sites, and no, this is not an Olympic stand. It's a way for people to get up on their horses. The Kinsol Trestle is one of the tallest freestanding timber rail trestles in the world. It's 187 meters in length and 44 meters above the Coxella River. The last train to cross it was in 1979, and it sat abandoned until its rehabilitation in 2010 and reopening in 2011. Look at that. Isn't that amazing? Now it is part of the Cowichan Valley Trail that allows for people to walk or to cycle or ride their horses. No motorized vehicles are allowed, except for probably those vehicles that do repairs on the trail. As you read before, this was filmed in the summer. I think it was August of 2024. You can see that the river's pretty low, but there's lots of green. There's some cyclists. I don't understand why there were so few people on this August day compared to the relatively cold March 1st that Ron and I did this past week. I can only imagine that it had something to do with the end of winter and people wanting to get out. Hang on. There are trails all the way down to the river. And on the far end here, there's this lookout. This area has been very lucky that it's not been taken by the wildfires that plague BC. Time to get back on that ferry and head on home. So this is Entrance Island, and that's a fishing boat coming into Nanaimo at the end of the day. Entrance Island has this awesome lighthouse and the lighthouse keepers' houses, and behind it is Gabriola Island, one of the larger Gulf islands off the coast of Nanaimo. There's a little tiny island. I wonder if that's counted in the 40,000. I don't know. Maybe it's just low tide. Well, it's time to say goodbye to Vancouver Island and a lovely weekend away. If you want to see more of trips around BC, please consider following and liking this video.